There's a reason why some attorneys are really great at what they do. But if you're not working with a real estate attorney, you have to be very mindful that even attorneys aren't this like end all be all. That's not very knowledgeable. There's benefits to hiring an older attorney who's taken CE courses and they know what they're doing, but not all of them are made the same.
After the failure to pay rent, how do they get to the eviction stage?
If you're doing a failure to pay rent yourself, try to personally serve the tenant. That's one of the things that most people don't realize. I mean, if you personally have the sheriff go serve them the letter, you're later avoiding having to do a money judgment.
Welcome to the Everyday Millionaire Show with Ryan Greenberg and Nick Kalfas. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Millionaire Show. We're here with Diana Khan and Nick Kalfas. What's up, guys?
What's up? What's up?
We're in the new studio here in the middle of nowhere, Owings Mills.
Hey, first of all, every time you film me, we're in a new studio.
That's true.
I don't know what's going on.
The first time it was a new studio at my house, and then my wife got tired of us filming podcasts in our brand new house. So
I'm actually really mad about that still to this day, because I did a whole scout of your studio because we never really worked together, and I was like, okay, like gets it from here up, and then you made me sit on those ugly chairs.
They're not ugly chairs, but yes, the setup was not ideal.
That's fine.
It was the first one. It was the first go around with that setup.
And this might be the second one. We might be on a third one after this.
We'll fix it.
All right, so got a lot of news. Diana was just on, I think, a couple months ago, and a lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
So I guess quick background, Diana's team hit me up about sponsoring one of our events, and then that snowballed into coming on the podcast, and then that snowballed into being business partners and her taking over all of our law needs, attorney needs, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. So we have Diana doing all of our collections for a property management company. Failure to pay rent, which is something we're going to talk about today. What else do you do, Diana? Evictions.
We do trust, estates, wills, all sort of.
We talked about all the trusts last time. We'll touch a little bit on that. But now we're going to talk about some specific property management stuff that Nick wanted to touch on. Nick, you want to let it rip?
Yeah, definitely. So for those of you who didn't listen to the last episode with Diana, we talked about trust. We talked about liabilities, LLCs, operating agreements, and life insurance. So if you guys want to learn about that, listen to our prior episode with her. I guess we can start with failure to pay rents, and this can be a question for both of you. Really, when is a good time to file a failure to pay rent?
And the first day you can.
Yeah, I was gonna let Ryan answer first, but it doesn't sound like he's gonna get tripped up. So, number one thing people call me about is I try to be a good guy and we let these people go, and now it's been 2 years and they're still in the property. So when you're doing failure to pay rents, remember that they get 3 chances, right? That's 3 different filings where you take them all the way up to eviction, and they can pay you the day the sheriff shows up, and they're not going anywhere. So the moment they fall behind, you should file. It's cheap to file. It's under $100, and the worst case is you're wasting a little bit of your time. But once you have 3 of them in your pocket, then at that point, they can't do the whole pay and catch up thing. So first day you can. So that's, you have to give the notice, and then once the 10 days of the notice is up, file.
And that's here in Maryland, too. So anybody that's listening out of state, there's probably different rules, I'd imagine, for different places.
Yeah. And they're changing the rules next summer. The filing fees are now going to almost triple.
That's fun. Make it even more difficult for landlords.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I noticed with mom and pop landlords that I end up taking over management for is that they did that thing where I was just trying to be a good guy. They built a relationship with that tenant. That tenant fell on hard times. I had some sort of sob story. There was emotions involved. And that was me in the beginning too. Mm-hmm. And you hear like, oh my God, this person's aunt died, or this person lost their job or whatever. And like, if you're a property manager, you're going to hear every single excuse. But it's business too. And you got to kind of separate emotions and business, especially, it's different, I guess, for you. If you're managing your own properties, you have your own decisions to make. But if we're managing other people's properties, it's somebody else's money.
Yeah. I would think that that's easier to take the emotion out when you're doing it for other people who are relying on you to get their rent collected and file, as soon as possible. Whereas same with me at the beginning, I would give them so much leeway, the tenants, and build that relationship. I got my emotions involved to where they would tell me one thing, like, oh, I'm going to pay rent in 2 weeks, just give me a couple weeks. That day would come and they would just push it off. So I'm starting to tighten down on everything now, and I do agree with you guys, like, file as soon as you can.
And that doesn't mean you're going to kick them out right that day.
Yeah. And I even text them too, like, hey, look, I have to file this failure to pay notice just to give you a heads up. Everything will be fine if you guys do get caught back up on rent, but I do have to file this just in case you don't get caught back up. I need to, to get my property back.
So I find that the property managers that have us hired to kind of do their corporate counsel, moment somebody is like 5 days behind, they get a letter from us, they're more likely to catch up than the people who don't have that. It's something about the law firm logo. They just get, they pay it right away, which, works out in our favor. But I will say that even being in the field where I actually evict people for a living, it still gets you. I mean, we had a tenant holdover. This man's wife passed away like 2 years ago, and now his kids are 11 and 6. And the landlord did everything to get him out nicely, like everything, before he hired me. He even offered him, like, here, I'll give you $10,000, relocate back to where you're living from. I understand you lost your wife. And this man was just like, I can't keep a job. Everything is wrong. We did a tenant holdover. We went to court. He showed up to court. Same sob story. We won in court. He then had 8 weeks before the eviction date, and we decided to serve him, even though Baltimore City requires you just give notice. We decided to serve him for the eviction, right? And he evaded service by having his kids answer the door. And we went there 13 times.
Wow.
So the day of the eviction, we get there, sheriff's there, and we're knocking on the door, and we're thinking they're not there. So we're about to, like, break open the door, and this, like, 11-year-old answers the door. And there's a 6-year-old in the background. And we go in, father's not there. We're like, where's your dad? He's like, oh, he had an emergency. We're like, can you call him? We call him. He's like, I'm in the hospital. I didn't know this was happening today. Just total bullshit. And sheriff looked at me and was like, well, I can call Child Protective Services for you to get the property today, or we can reschedule. And this was almost 2 years of not paying rent, and we still are sitting there like, dude, you're going to have me call Child Protective Services on your kid? It's like, that's insane.
That's crazy that he was offering that much money and they still wouldn't get out. But I've kind of taken myself away from that completely, where it's just like today, Diana was going to court on our behalf, and I had no idea. And that's probably the best way to do it, which is like the staff in the office knows that this day of the month, if you're late, they send out the letters or they send the documents to Diana's team, and then it goes out. It's like that's a system that just can't be broken by anybody. And if I don't know about it, there's no emotion can be even put into it.
And the most effective property managers work on that system. There's many times where their staff talk to me, and I'll go up to, like, my friends and I'll be like, hey, like, such and such is evictions next week. They're like, I have no idea who that is. I'm like, that's a good thing. You don't, know, it's facts and figures. You pay to stay in the house. It's just that simple.
Yep.
Yeah. And every tenant that I've dealt with, I'm sure you guys as well, they all have a story. So you can easily get sucked into that story if you're a new landlord out there and you're listening to your tenant and you feel sorry for their situation. Everybody has a situation.
And some of them might be true, too. Some of the stories might be true, but unfortunately, you can't just live for free.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. So one of the things that I think, too, is that we like to do is try to, like, empower people or educate people. If it's like a single mom, like we just did this. I tried to do this with that girl that you went to court with today. We sent her all the documents and stuff that she needed to apply for, like Section 8 and, the voucher programs or whatever, and she just didn't do it. So, like, we gave her all of the things. We gave her all. She started falling behind during COVID. We gave her all the stuff to get the COVID money. She didn't do it. She then went finally last minute before she was about to be evicted, went and they released like a couple grand in COVID money. And then she had to like refile to get more with the new ledger or whatever. And she just never did it. And it was like $10,000.
$10,000 is what you got today.
Yeah. So if you can only help, you can lead a horse to water, I guess they say, right? But
make a drink.
Yeah. So like in that situation, we did everything we could to be good people. And unfortunately, that just didn't work out.
And I think, they're passing this bill that's going to come out next summer, but there's a whole bill coming out that's going to make it impossible for landlords. It's going to be more expensive to evict people. There's going to be a lot more like notice requirements and all that. So it's very important that if you're a landlord and you're listening to this, you know those rules, because even in my job, the evolution of it has changed, right? Like a couple of years ago, we just do failure to pay rent and we just move on and everything will be fine. Now I'm noticing tenants are suing for the security deposit, even if they left the property a mess and they were like 12 months behind, and they're suing on the fact that they could sue for 3 times the security deposit if you don't follow the notice requirements. And they count the days. They're like, okay, it's 1, 2, 3. How many days till we give the notice for the EMD? And if you're not compliant with that, you will lose in court, even if they owed you 6 months rent. Judges are not messing with that rule anymore, whereas 2 years ago, we never heard about it. So I have a bunch in my, in my client base right now where it's people who tenant broke the lease early, tenant moved out, tenant left the property destroyed, and now the tenant's suing them for security deposit.
Yeah, I'm dealing with that right now. A tenant went to the courthouse and filed on me for the security deposit, and they moved out like 5 days prior to that.
Yeah.
I have 45 days to return the security deposit, and they broke the lease. They left the lease early, and they stayed. Like, I forget exactly what month it was, but they told me like 2 weeks before they were moving out on like the 1st, but they didn't move out until like the 7th. So we kept a whole month's of rent for that month that they didn't move out, and they were supposed to be out. And they also didn't give that 60-day notice that we've required in our lease.
And I guess people don't realize how important those deadlines are, because somebody who goes to court for all this stuff, I'll tell you right now, the judges, just like they don't care about the tenant's like sob story if they're behind on rent, they also don't care about our sob story if it's like 1 day off on the notice requirement. So if you're doing a lot of this stuff yourself, you could lose security deposits, or you could get a bunch of stupid lawsuits just because you're not counting the days right. Because I think, even when you hear it's 45 days to return the security deposit, if I ask a landlord, well, when does the first day start? Is it the day they move out? The next day? When does it start? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, if they move out today, is day 1 tomorrow or today? And most people don't realize that there is an actual statute that defines the word days if it's not defined in your lease. So it's little things like that where you're kind of not thinking about it until something happens.
Yeah, that's how it goes. So we have one situation in Baltimore City, but it's like a high-end home, and I know you've already been sort of across it, but the tenant asked to leave in like December, November. We said their lease was up in July. We were like, no, but we'll break in like April, which is like a better season to try to rent, a property or whatever. And on Christmas Eve, I got a notice or a call that her whole house has flooded out.
Oh, gosh.
And it's suspected by us, the plumber, everybody else, that somebody went in there, because she was away, apparently. Somebody went in there and left the vanity turned on and purposely flooded the entire house. We had to redo hardwood floors, basement floor, everything. We had a mitigation company. I was on Christmas Day. Yeah. So we had like 12 people working there on Christmas Day this year. She's now asking for her security deposit back, and we had to like do all this stuff. So we have a situation similar, which is fun.
And I'm going to call you out for a second on that one, because one of the things that happened is she did all that, right? The water accidentally happened, and then she served you to end the lease early, like you caused it, and your resident agent didn't give you the letter because it was like mailed wrong. So you ended up losing in court, even though you had a very valid case.
Yeah.
Because we didn't even know what was happening. So that's where it's so important your stuff is in line. If you're going to be a landlord, like, make sure your resident agent is lined up. Make sure you're working with an attorney, or you're working with somebody who's doing it well, because the little things matter.
Yeah, that's true. And I also heard, so we were using one of those big companies for failures to pay rent and stuff, but we were finding that they were taking like months and months and months, and then we found out that they were batching all of their cases and like putting them all in the system at once. So you could, like, if you filed with them today, they might not put that in for a week or two, which was causing some of these like 3-4 months where we didn't have a court date. We're like, what the heck is going on? So knowing who's filing, knowing that they know what to do is like super, super important, especially here in Baltimore, where it's very tenant friendly.
So right before COVID hit, it was 7 days. If you filed a failure to pay rent, you had a court date 7 days later.
That's crazy.
So that
would be
like
nice.
We knew. I would know that if I went to go file on Monday, I'm going to court the following Monday. Like I could predict if it wasn't Monday, it'd be Tuesday. It wouldn't be like too far off. So now if you're working with somebody and they're telling you we don't have a court date and it's a failure to pay rent and it's like it's been a few months, they're not filing. Because while it's not 7 days, it's not taking 5 months either.
Right.
PG County, I think we ended up having like a 3 or 4 week turnaround. In Baltimore County, we had a 2 week turnaround. So really, if you're taking quite a while, they probably didn't file it.
Yeah.
So after I guess for those of the audience who's listening right now, after the failure to pay rent, how do they get to the eviction stage?
Yeah.
Like you file a failure to pay when a tenant falls behind, and then what's the next step in that process to eviction?
So after you filed a failure to pay rent, so a couple of things. First, if you're doing a failure to pay rent yourself, try to personally serve the tenant. That's one of the things that most people don't realize. You can put a failure to pay rent on the door, and if you put it on the door, cool, you'll get the court date. But if you serve them, if you personally have the sheriff go serve them the letter, you're later avoiding having to do a money judgment, because they will give a judgment for the back paid rent. So a lot of the time we do both. We will have them serve personally. So when you do the failure to pay rent, you're also getting that money judgment for the back rent.
Can anybody serve somebody?
We use a third-party process server, and you can also ask the sheriff to do it from the courthouse and pay for it. So you have to use like a certain service. We usually will just pay for, I think the sheriff is $25 when you file to do it, and they will attempt to do it. If they don't, we tell them just put it on the door. But we always pay that extra $25 because when you do the failure to pay rent, you're now avoiding 6 months of litigation later to get that back rent. So they'll give you the money judgment or not, and then there's basically an appeals period where you can't do anything. You're just sitting around. And depending on the county, it's anywhere between 4 to 11 days. You're not doing anything but waiting for the tenant to pay you. The tenant doesn't pay, you're then filing what's called a writ of restitution. So a writ of restitution is literally like a judgment order that says, hey, they haven't paid, we'd like to go ahead and enforce the eviction. And just like working with bigger firms, the problem is that when you file the writ, it gets scanned into their system, and a judge literally gets an email with hundreds of them, and then you have to wait for the judge to sign off on it. It could be a day, it could be 5 days, it could be 10 days. There's no like time period. So my office, we call every single day because we have so many of them. We'll call Baltimore County and be like, hey, we filed 5 writs. Where's the decision? Because what we're trying to do is just remind the clerks we exist and like, hey, get this off your desk. Once the writ is approved, it goes to the sheriff where you get that date where the sheriff will meet you at the property. As of last week, we used to have to call the sheriff's office. It used to be, they'd be like, yeah, we're sending the writ to the sheriff, wait a week. And then call the sheriff and you'll get a date. As of like a week or 2 ago, now there's a website. So once you have the writ, you have the case number, you go online, you submit it, and you wait a couple of days and you'll get an email and it'll say your eviction date is on this date. And again, every county is different. Baltimore City is about 2 to 3 weeks. You'll get a sheriff's date. I had one in Baltimore County that was like 7 weeks.
The moral of this story is just hire somebody that's
Yeah.
really good at this, because all that sucks. Like,
yeah, I was watching your face. You were kind of glazing over.
I was just like, yeah, I don't even feel like listening to you talk about this anymore because it's that mundane and silly.
It is silly. And if you're not working with the right people, it just gets lost. Like that's the whole thing is it doesn't make me a good lawyer to know how to do this stuff, right? It's just deadlines and time frames, and it's really just having that back office that does it for you. And if you're working with an attorney that's like, yeah, I'll do everything personally, you're calling the courthouse every day for a
Or
writ.
if you just try to do it yourself, it's just never worth your time, I feel like. That's
Right.
the other thing. It's like, it would be easier just to say, kind of fuck it, I'm not going to do it, because once you try to figure out all that whole process and then you do it wrong and you get like, you lose in court or whatever, then you just wasted a ton of time.
So I'm going to call out Nick on that one.
Oh, yeah. You guys saw each other at court, didn't you?
I filed for him. So we charge for the filing and then we charge for the court appearance. So Nick decided that he wanted to see what the experience of a failure to pay rent was. And he decided not to pay me to appear. Now I had several that day. So I sent one of my staff and she was like, well, do you just want to tell Nick we'll just go for him? And I was like, no. And he went out there and I talked to him later and he's like, I thought it was just a quick thing. I was the last person called. I was sitting there for 3 hours and I was like,
Yeah, we both got called around the same time too, so it's like we were both there the whole time.
So Nick, are you going to do that yourself again?
Probably not.
I just feel like if it's like a big judgment too, and you already had lost the money, like for me, like that was a collections case. The lady's out, right?
Right.
So I already lost that money. I might as well just like send her to do it.
Oh
right?
yeah, for sure. I mean, I've
Like
never done a collection case on my own,
Can you? I don't even think you can. Can you?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
No.
at Folio, they have a feature that you just click a button and it says sends the collection.
And
it's
you've
some
never
BS
collected
collection.
a single dollar
No,
from.
it's like some company out of like California, I think, and they don't really help out much.
Yeah.
It's okay. I finally got Nick to the dark side. He
Good.
just gave us a few today.
So, aside from failure to pays and tenants who are actually supposed to be in properties, what should someone do if they either purchase a property or if they own a property, somebody breaks into it, and now they are dealing with squatters? What should someone do in that situation?
So with a squatter, if they're a squatter, they don't have any like notice requirements, right? You just can file to get them out, and then the court date is still not 2 to 3 weeks out. And I think you and I had a similar one like that. The problem is squatters are showing up to the courthouse with fake leases, and they're saying, "Here's my lease. I'm not actually a squatter." So most people ask me, "Well, it's a fake lease. It's fine." I was like, "No. The way the courthouse works is if you file for a squatter, that's not the same as a tenancy eviction. So if you're in the wrong courthouse, the judge won't even listen to the facts. They'll just throw it out. So you have to be prepared that the squatter might have a lease. You have to be prepared that they'll say that they had legal rights to do it. So if you're purchasing a property that's coming from the seller that has a squatter in there and you're deciding, hey, I'm going to take it because it's cheaper, right? Make sure you get something from the seller that says that there was never an active lease, that it's notarized at settlement, so that you have something from them, so that whoever's representing you for that squatter will show it to the courthouse and be like, hey, here we go.
And what's the timeline on you go into a house, you've noticed there's a squatter there until the time that the sheriff typically is going to get them out of there?
4 to 8 weeks, sometimes 12. Yeah, it's a lot. And I mean, they should be out, right? Like the idea is that hopefully that you don't get to the sheriff's point. But once they're in, you can't turn off, the BGE. You can't really you can't force them out. So that's the mindful part you have to be careful of.
Yeah.
So, they just did one for me. I think it took about 6 weeks from the date of filing to get the court hearing. And the whole time, as you know, they created a fake lease and as if they were in the property legally.
So you bought the property and there was somebody in there?
Yeah. So I bought the property. The house was listed on the MLS. And the seller got a call from a neighbor. And the neighbor said, hey, I think someone's in your house. Did someone move in? Did you sell it? He's like, no one's supposed to be there. So he went there. The cops showed up. He said even a police helicopter came. And there was nothing they could do. They couldn't get the people out. So at that point, they're good to stay in the house as squatters. And he decided to take it off the market, called an auction company. The auction company called me and said, hey, I got the seller. Squatters just moved in 2 weeks ago. He just wants to sell the property at a discount, obviously, now that it's occupied. And I bought it knowing they were in there. After I settled, we filed the wrongful detainer. And the girl presented a lease. And she didn't bring it to court. She didn't even bring it up in court.
Yeah.
Which I was very surprised because I feel like that was one of the grounds that she may have had.
So if she has a lease with clearly a forged name on it, that's not even potentially at that point the owner, does that still hold up in court?
So the lease was James Weisenkircher as the landlord. So I emailed him. I said, hey, can you give me a document and sign it saying that you have no relation to this property? You don't know who these tenants are? Because I knew he didn't sign it, right?
So was he just the agent trying to sell the property to begin with?
No, not even.
Not
it was
even.
just they must have looked up a real estate agent online, found his name, decided to sign his name. So when we went to court, they showed up to court with the document from him signed, in case we needed that as evidence. But the squatter showed up and she didn't even present the lease, which I was very surprised.
But I think
Can't they get in big trouble for that?
Yeah, you have to prove it. And again, I think a lot of people think when you get in trouble, unless you're doing a criminal thing, right? Trouble is really...
Like forging somebody's name?
Yeah, but you have to actually file and go through it. And who's going to do the time and effort for that? And I think in this case, you brought up a really good point, is because we knew they had the fake lease, we got proof from the named landlord. And if you have a name of a fake lease, I can find their information. And then we'll contact them and get proof ahead of time. The other thing that you can do is if you're purchasing the property from a seller that maybe does multiple properties, maybe they're like Orion and they have a property management company, ask them to show you a few of their leases and say, hey, can you give me a copy of 3 of your leases? So then what you're doing is when you go to the courthouse, we've actually shown hey, Your Honor, the previous seller's name was Ryan. He's a property manager. Here's the leases that he typically uses for his business. We've brought 3 or 4 of them as examples. The one that the squatter has is not typical of his business structure. We don't know where this came from. And that's a big factor, because remember, if you purchase it and they say fake lease, the judge is not going to take the stance of you're the new owner now.
Right.
They're going to tell you to file in a different courthouse.
Jeez, makes me want to just start buying houses in Florida more and more. I feel
And
like there's
you know,
better
Nick-
places.
Nick used us for that one too, and I think he got a little nervous, right? You were saying you got
I was
nervous.
sitting there and I'm listening to the judge. The judge was talking very slow, and she had to ask the clerk a couple questions in regards to the cases before ours. So I'm like, does this judge even know what she's talking about? But thankfully, when we got up there, the evidence was presented very well, and I was surprised that the girl showed up, the squatter, but she did, and she tried to say, oh, well, someone scammed me out of this lease, and I signed this lease, and, Singleton asked, how much is the market rent for the property, and I said, $1,800, and she's like, see, I have a lease that says $1,800. How else would he know that the property is rented for $1,800? I said, well, that's just the market value of the property. But it was cool that we won that case because I was very nervous leading up to it because there was a handful before ours that really weren't going that well.
And that goes to experience too. I had a trial in Essex, right, and it was a district court, and this was a professional tenant by all means. It was a very simple case, but she came to trial and she objected every time I spoke. It was to a point where you could tell the judge wanted to take a shot of something because he couldn't deal with it. At one point, she started screaming that her cat was cremated. And I'm trying to remain professional throughout the whole thing, right? And I have a witness with me, and we're asking the witness questions, and the judge interrupts me in the middle of it and goes, where are you going with this line of questioning? And, Your Honor, I'm just trying to show why we don't have a rental license for this, because now for tenant holdover, you're required to have a rental license. The judge, in February of this year, said that's not true. And I was like, with all due respect, the law changed last October. He took a recess and went to the back and printed the statute and printed the wrong one and brought it to me and was like, well, where does it say that? And I knew it changed. I just didn't know the statute number. So I was like, with all due respect, Your Honor, like, I'm going to go ahead and present my case because I don't want this to happen on appeal. He ended up stepping out a second time, printed out the statute, and on the record said, as counsel has taught me, the law changed, and now you're required to have a license to evict people through tenant holdover. The law changed like 5 months ago. I was sitting there like, you sit on this docket. You make decisions every single day for landlords and for tenants, and you are not even privy to the full scope of the law. And that makes me so nervous. So I will say that if you are listening to this, or you are a landlord or a property manager, it's not always that, the lawyer you hired is not good. Because as lawyers, we always talk to each other about the fact that district court is the wild, wild west. Mm-hmm. I could go to a case 3 times in one day in front of 3 different judges and have 3 very different outcomes. So that's one of the hang-ups when you have failure to pay rent or landlord situations is how the judge is feeling that day is very, very much a big factor. We're very tenant-friendly.
And I just want to add on to that anyone listening who decides to file a failure to pay, and I ran into this gem when I first started out. I didn't have most of my properties 5 years ago licensed, and when I would go to court or try to file, they said you needed to be licensed, and
Yep.
I'm like, oh crap! So then I would scramble around trying to file. But then if you don't have let's say it's April right now, and you want to file for a tenant, they didn't pay April, you file, and you get your license on May 1st. Well, you can't legally collect that
Correct.
rent prior to that date you were filed, and a judge can say, well, did you collect money before you were licensed? And if you say yes, they may hold you accountable to pay that money that you collected back to that tenant.
Well, the statute also says it's a $1,000 a day fine.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah, I've never seen anybody enforce it. I doubt that would be the case.
They're
But
trying to on one of Chad's properties, I believe, we're a client of his right now, that they can't get a rental license because there was no building permit pulled, and there was, they need to pull permits, and I guess there's people in there, and yeah, they are at least threatening it. They're not necessarily.
Chad, you need to call me. I can help.
Yeah. Well, we're handling the building permit part of the
go.
thing. But yeah, so that's that. Next on our list, next on my list, we partnered on Lux Realty, your brand.
Yep.
So we could tell people about that and how Nick's coming over now to the dark side of Lux. We have Chase over here at
Let's go,
Lux.
Team Lux.
Everybody.
Live better, live Lux.
Team
That's the whole
Lux.
idea.
It is a little bit of a girly kind of name,
Hey,
but
hey.
it's okay.
Look, the whole idea of Lux really is that there's a lot of traditional brokerages out there. And I think what makes us very special is that all of us that are at Lux are vertically integrated across multiple income streams. So you're not working with people who are yes, they're doing traditional real estate as well, but for the most part, we're all talking about how do we get better together. You know, the agents next to you are also flipping houses, or they're wholesalers, or they're, you know, they can walk through a house with you and help you figure out, how do I flip this? It's my first flip, because all of us are in that industry. And having me as the broker with, you know, being a real estate broker of traditional brokerages and also my law firm that's so investor friendly gives you the scope of, this is what you can do according to the MR contract. This is where we need to kind of be hesitant, and allows us to grow while not necessarily focusing on just a real estate career.
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a real estate career right now as like a salesperson without
Absolutely.
having other things in play. Like for us, like the investing is number one, but having the brokerage and having people out there at least finding deals, sourcing deals, being able to pitch the, oh, we could buy your house in cash, or your house is okay, we can probably just list it on the MLS for you. We have multiple different kind of options. I know that's something that Chase has been doing with the leads that we've been generating from the cold calling, is kind of going and offering them, hey, we are a traditional brokerage, but we're also investors. So if you want to make this quick and easy, we can buy it for cash. Or if you want maybe to squeeze some more money out of it, we'll be able to list it and, you know, put it out on the open market for you.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a good marketing / advertising piece, knowing that the agents that are part of it have that investor experience. Because let's say there's someone that maybe owns one home and wants to get involved in real estate investing. They may go to, you know, Remax or Long and Foster or Keller Williams and try to find an agent. And not all agents know about real estate investing. I mean, I know when I became an agent at first, I didn't know anything about real estate investing, and a lot of the agents around me didn't as well. So it's nice to have that.
I teach a lot, and I have agents come up to me every time I teach, and they're like, oh, you know, I'm at Keller Williams, I'm at Remax, I just did a wholesale, and I use the MR contract. Like, how do I fix that? And I'm like, come to Lux. We will teach you how to do it, and you'll capitalize on it, because we'll allow you to use our leads, or we'll have you use our cold callers, so that we are growing together. And the idea really is that when you are with us, you know, you've got access to my law firm. You can ask questions without getting charged $500 for a general question. But in exchange, I also know that if you're doing a probate, it's likely going to end up at my desk.
Yeah, and I also, when I've been on appointments with Chase, I'll be like, I fake that I'm not even like the real estate agent at all. Like I'm just a contractor there to like figure out a price to fix stuff or whatever. So we do have a lot of things like in-house that we can, you know, help new agents. I think there's every new agent out there is like always looking for a contractor.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm aware of, Diana, and you can pitch this a little more too, is like with this whole NAR thing, like the traditional broker or agent is gonna like kind of disappear, right?
Yeah.
Like you're gonna have to get more creative, especially as a buyer's agent.
So I'll share something that I did not sign do not disclose. So this is really awesome. I think this is going to get you quite a lot of views on this one. I was driving the other day and I got a phone call from a random title company. And so sorry, they're going to come after me on this. And I picked up the phone and we're talking a little bit. And he said, you know, I'm an attorney, I'm in DC, and we are starting a coalition of attorneys that are going to use this NAR thing to create an association of attorneys willing to do the buyer's agent's job for a much cheaper rate than 2.5%. They're like, if they're going to pay 2.5%, and now it's not up to, you know, the seller isn't going to pay it, maybe they'll choose not to, why would you hire a realtor versus a lawyer? So they asked me to head up the Maryland location and be part of that website and be part of one of the approved attorneys with these vertical businesses. So that tells me that attorneys themselves are kind of going to capitalize on this issue. And I got to say, it's pretty smart, because if you're going to pay 2.5%, you could pay me 1.5%, and I have a law degree to go with it.
Yeah, I feel like with the whole NAR thing or whatever, the way I view it is like we're just going to be doing listings. Like we're heavy on listings anyway, typically with everything that we're flipping or whatever. We're going to be doing listings in-house with an employee-based showing agent, essentially. So that it's not a buyer's agent. It's just somebody to go open the door. It's kind of like what Redfin already has a little bit. They have like, you know, $20 an hour employees that can go open the door for somebody. But the real agent doing the deal is sitting, you know, behind their desk, which is normally what happens with like a, you know, a higher end agent anyway, is typically going to have their assistant showing the properties, and they're just like negotiating on their behalf. And I feel like it's going to be the same thing. Maybe instead of charging 5%, we charge 3.5%, and we're getting 3.5% minus the $50 or $60 we pay the showing agent or whoever it is. They'll have to be licensed, obviously, but
Right.
they'll just be an employee essentially.
And I think it's just so important now that we're coming into this different time is I've spoken to different people across the board, and there's agents who are traditional and they're all nervous about it, right? But then there's the people sitting in this room and there's the people that work with us at Lux, and they're like, yeah, this is not going to change anything we're doing. And if you are listening to this and you are a traditional realtor and you're not currently looking at how to vertically integrate your business or how to grow in a model that allows you to sort of be self-employed or grow your own, now's the time to start, because ultimately I don't think this is going to hurt the market. I think it's going to hurt the traditional realtors.
Yeah, I absolutely think the traditional buyer's agent is not worth paying as a buyer.
Correct.
So like just to get a listing, just to get a property shown, you don't need somebody that's licensed to do all that.
Right.
Like you just don't.
I think with the amount of open houses too, like people aren't utilizing agents before. It used to be, a buyer's agent gets you a list. It's all on Zillow now. There's nothing really. The benefit to using a traditional agent is going to go out the window if you're paying them full, right? Like they're either going to have to sacrifice their fee or anything else. But for the most part, for Lux, for us, this is going to be a huge advantage.
I don't know if you guys have heard of Show Mojo. Have you heard of Showing Mojo?
Yeah.
So it's like a technology platform essentially, and they come with like lock boxes or locks, door locks, but they're essentially camera lock boxes that you can send 1 day codes to, or 1 hour codes, 10-minute codes, whatever, and you can actually show properties to people remotely. So like you won't even be there, you just let them in. And then there's like a camera set up inside that makes sure that they lock the door. The door will automatically lock or whatever. It's pretty cool, but in certain areas, I could see it being an issue. Obviously, like if it's in like a low income area and people are breaking in, squatters or whatever. But
Or you got that that seller who's got a $5 million house and he's like, no.
yeah. There's probably definitely a time or place for it. But again, if you have a $5 million house, you can afford to send somebody from the listing team to open the door for somebody. But I think that's where it's going to go. It's where our listings are just going to be sold. It's like almost like everyone's going to be a dual agency essentially. We're just going to be all in house.
Well, I don't know if you guys follow, but like over in Europe, the attorney thing, they have 2 attorneys on both sides.
Yep.
And then they have a listing agent, and then that listing agent has showing agents. So like they go do the showings, and then the 2 attorneys, the buyer's attorneys, and they call them vendors, but they're sellers. They're sellers.
I think I was talking to you about that too. The lady from New Zealand that we met with, she's coming in on the 22nd of June.
Right.
And that's how they sell properties there. There's one broker, and the broker deals with both parties. And that's just easy.
And I think if you are a traditional realtor or you are thinking, how do I attack this? Even attorneys now are starting these coalitions and all that. This guy basically wants me to head up the Maryland one, and I was like, that's my referral source, dude. I'm not knocking where I eat. But I think the other thing you have to keep in mind is not all realtors and not all attorneys are made the same, right? And I think what most people don't realize, at least in the state of Maryland, as a lawyer, I can graduate law school and not do a single continuing education course till I die. I'm just a lawyer. So
On the realtor side?
no,
Or
as an attorney. So the problem is that if you're hiring this like attorney to represent you in a real estate contract, and that's not your bread or butter, there's a reason why some attorneys are really great at what they do. But if you're not working with a real estate attorney and you're dealing with like, your aunt's cousin who does workers' comp, and you're like, here, review this contract for me, it's no better than hiring a real estate agent that does 1 transaction a year. You have to be very mindful that even attorneys aren't this like end all be all. That's not very knowledgeable. It's very often I get hired after another attorney's been fired and they're like, well, my attorney doesn't know what they're doing. And it's like, they just don't know because that's not their bread or butter. Like, there's benefits to hiring an older attorney who's taken CE courses and they know what they're doing, but not all of them are made the same.
So for the buyers, opening the door for them, I feel like that's just a very small factor. I guess you both can answer this question. Who would do the negotiating? Ryan, for example, if you had a showing assistant open the door for a potential buyer, who would be representing them as far as like helping them negotiate the deal?
I mean, you could negotiate without being the showing agent, right? Or without
Can
being...
I jump in on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so typically, like in Europe, the buyer represents himself. So that's where they're kind of at a disadvantage, right? Like you're going against a listing agent or a broker who negotiates 200 plus transactions a year, and they're kind of at that slight disadvantage. So like when they were looking at America, they were like, hey, that's kind of like a fair situation
Right.
they have going on. But now the buyer either has to negotiate themselves or have an experienced lawyer that is in real estate and understands law and can negotiate on their behalf. Now, the other part to this to think about is like there's always been a Mr. Listed or flat fee brokerages. So like how much will this really change what is going on in real estate? And then two, like the other part is like I think Washington has took MLS fees for buyer's agents off the MLS for like a year now, and
Right.
nothing's really changed.
So in those cases, is the buyer picking up that fee?
So there's a couple ways it can go, right? Like the buyer's agent can be really creative, and they can negotiate their fee within the purchase price. You could get closing seller concessions, right? Or the seller can just agree to pay the buyer's agent, or the buyer pays their own agent.
I also feel like there's just maybe a little bit more emotion than needs to be or whatever, because there's other things that we can buy in this world without having 3 fucking attorneys involved
Yeah,
or
but
3
think of the
realtors
first
or
time
whatever.
home buyer, like
Yeah, but the first time you buy a boat, it's the same thing. Or the first time you buy a camper, it's $250,000. It's
Yeah.
the same thing, right? You're going there, you got to negotiate your own behalf. You should be educated in the thing that you're about to purchase, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like I feel like there's some aspect of that too. Just
Yeah,
like,
but I feel like if you're buying a $250,000 camper, you already have a house and you've already been
Well,
represented by the
maybe.
buyer at that time.
Well, also, I don't think most normal people are buying a $250,000
Yeah.
camper.
and then
Well,
like a lot
I mean-
of first-time home buyers, they don't even know about home inspections and what to do in that scenario of requesting
So-
items to be corrected.
then the good brokerages will put out education courses, and I've
Right.
seen other brokerages do this where you have first-time homebuyer seminars where people come in and there's a lender there, there's a title person there, and they go through that whole process. And
But that's
I
to
feel
get
like-
buyers. Now that fee's getting taken away, they have no desire to get the buyers if they know that they're not going to be getting
well,
a fee
they
at
will.
the end of the day.
They will want the buyers if they have the houses to sell.
So I just had a transaction where it was in an Orthodox Jewish community, and I listed the house as coming soon. And the moment it hit coming soon, I got a phone call from like a synagogue or something nearby, and they had like 20 buyers who are looking just in this particular area. So all 20 of them wanted to see the property, wanted to be unrepresented. They wanted the property. They would have literally given me anything they wanted. So I had a buyer who was unrepresented, and I was on the other side representing my friend. And I got to tell you, it was a cluster. It was like a complete cluster because first I had it listed at 420. He offered 450. Then he got declined for his loan. He didn't understand what FHA versus conventional appraisals meant. And it took me a whole week to figure out he didn't even qualify for the loan. And then it was just, it was very hard for me to maneuver because I kept thinking he was lying or dishonest. And I had to keep reminding myself that he doesn't know what I know. And he's just Googling things. And after 4 or 5 weeks of this house being under contract, we ended up putting it back on the market. And we could have probably avoided all of that if they were represented just the beginning. And when it was all said and done, they then got representation, right? And they tried to get the earnest money deposit back. And I said, listen, like my clients want at least half to cover their mortgage payment. You can have the other half, but they want at least half. And they text me and they said, we're going to report you to the commission because you tried to take advantage of us as a buyer. And I'm sitting there like, I literally did everything I could to get you to get this house. My clients waited 5 weeks for you. And it was just this whole unrepresented factor. So there's got to be a solution. What it's going to be, I think, is going to be brokerages like Lux, where we can afford to give representation to the other side and not be looking at a bottom line. And how that happens is you're surrounded by contractors or handyman or anything else we do so that we are not too worried about the bottom line of one representation. And that's why Lux is going to be very successful.
And I also think that if you are a buyer and it's your first transaction and you really feel the need for somebody, there's going to be agents out there that'll be willing to take a check, probably a lot less than 2.5%, to represent you.
Right.
Maybe a flat fee, like I'll pay you $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever to find my house, depending on what price range you're in. But if you feel that you need that, then you can get that. You could still. It's not like that doesn't exist, but I don't think it's necessary in every transaction at all.
It's also awkward, right? Like same house I listed at 2%. My clients didn't want to pay 2.5%, and accepted a new offer, and there was an addendum in there that said sellers will pay 2.5%, and my client didn't sign it. So we were ready. Inspection was set for the next day. Agent texted me, and she was like, well, can you have your client's initial the 2.5% addendum? I was like, no, they don't want to pay you 2.5%. They're paying you 2%. And she got she was texting me like every second. And then this was over the course of 3 hours, we had like 4 messages exchanged because you could tell she didn't know how to process the information. She was like, well, you said the offer was accepted. And I was like, the offer is accepted. Your compensation is not part of the offer.
Yeah.
And that's where like the bad listing agents will sink to the bottom and the good will rise.
Yeah.
Like, that's just
I
what
think
will
we
happen.
needed kind of a weaning of agents anyway.
Right.
Because every person that hated their 9-to-5 job and saw like selling sunset became an agent, and they're kind of just a liability at a lot of these brokerages that the brokerages are not, and we found this out from Ike coming on as well, like these bigger box store brokerage kind of things, they're not motivated to really teach their agents how to do things, navigate this world. Like they're just taught, this is the transaction, this is the marketing that you want to do, attack your sphere of influence, whatever the sales training that they get. And I know Keller Williams does a good job of like sales training, but that's not going to really help in the world of needing to bring stuff more in-house and kind of keep things smaller, less overhead. So then that 2.5 or 3.5% that you're going to get as the whole listing actually means something rather than trying to split 3% between 2 people.
Right. And I think, again, a traditional box brokerage, remember, if you're making 2.5%, they're not actually making 2.5%. They could switch to a brokerage like Lux. They could switch to a brokerage that's more economical. Probably make almost the same, but then have a lot more resources on how to do more for yourself, do more for your wealth building, help buyers, but also help yourself in a way by vertically integrating or learning the business from a different perspective.
So I think it may be similar to, if a lot of buyers who need seller contribution, obviously they don't have the money to give that 2.5% to their buyer's agent. I think it'd be very similar to them just tacking it on to the list price, right? Tacking on that 2.5% plus whatever seller contribution. It doesn't come from the seller's pocket. It just comes from that loan that the buyer's going to have for the next
Chase
30
and
years.
I talked about this. The only problem is going to be the loans.
Yeah.
The loans, right? Because what mortgage company is going to be like, all right, yeah, sure, I'll give you an extra $10,000 as a 30-year loan.
Yeah,
to
but
pay
how many
the buyer's
times does
agent?
an appraisal come back? Well, it's not going to be on the paper like that. How many times does the appraisal come back at exactly what the contract price is? And that's like a lot.
Right.
More,
So if you
more
paid
times
that
than not.
buyer's agent out of your pocket, you're underwater.
No, it's getting tacked onto the loan amount.
Oh, you're saying the appraisal came back with the loan amount?
No. So let's say the purchase price is $200,000. Let's say the buyer needs 2%, so that's 204, and let's say that they want to pay another 2.5%, so that's another 5,000. So let's say the total purchase price is 209,000. That's what you give as a contract, and you let them know, like, hey, look, I have to get my commission out of this fee, which is going to be 5,000, and then your seller contribution is going to be 4,000. So the net to the seller would be 200,000. The bank's going to say, all right, the loan amount is the purchase price is 209. The appraiser's going to come, and he's most likely going to make it $209,000 at the appraised value, and then that buyer will get whatever loan they're getting, 5% down, 3.5% down.
Can I ask you a question? How is that any different than what we're
Isn't
already
that
doing?
exactly what the fuck you're doing now?
So I think
No, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
That's what I'm
Are we
saying.
gonna full circle this?
I think it's going to be added in, like a seller contribution.
This sounds
will be
like
added
the
in.
fact that we now have non-alcoholic hard seltzers, because we like full circled from just like regular seltzer to hard seltzers, the
To
White Claws,
non-alcoholic.
and now we're back to alcohol-free White Claws. So this is like the same thing, right? Like we're full circled back to just traditional fucking listings.
The only problem that we now have is we have to explain it to a regular seller and a regular buyer, which good luck with
Yeah,
that,
you're
right?
right.
Like I'm thinking some of the sellers that I have, they're looking at their bottom line and they're going to be like, well, if the purchase price is 209 and I didn't want to pay a buyer's agent, they shouldn't have offered 209.
You know what's really fun is that we have 4 full-time real estate professionals in one room, and none of us know what the hell's going to happen, or what's like
Right.
even the rules that are like going to change, kind of thing. Like it's like, is it everything going to just stay the same ultimately?
I think the most important part of that conversation is that we have 4 full-time real estate professionals in this room, and not a single one of us is sweating about what's going to happen in June.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for it.
Whereas I think most are very, very stressed. This is the
I told Chase, I
conversation.
said, do we have to list any of these flips with fucking buyer's agent commissions built in. Like, I guess we might get less looks, but like, shit, I'm ready to put out a couple of 1%ers.
I think we are. We're 1.5%.
Yeah, 1.5.
Coming
We
soon.
want to recruit at Lux. Don't get enemies now. You know, Nick's going to come to Lux after this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Well,
he's
come to
coming.
Lux and we'll teach you how to be a good buyer's agent and sit down with buyers and have buyer agent consultations.
There you go.
I won't do that, but Chase will.
Yeah.
I'm not a good agent.
I'm a good negotiator.
No, I'm okay. I just personally, like, I've done so many transactions for myself where I just like know exactly what I want. So when I hear this, like the buyers like complain about something, it makes me cringe.
Right. And here's the thing, as being a real estate broker for quite a while, I know the real estate brokers out there, though I've talked to some of them, and mostly in situations where I'm suing, so conversations always go a little different. I know not none, but most of those brokers don't have the experience I do. Like, I listen to myself give advice to agents who are on our brokerage, and I'm like, no way they're getting this advice somewhere else. Because a real estate broker themselves doesn't have to be an attorney.
Right.
Which I think speaks
I think
big.
that's a huge selling point for us just recruiting agents too. It's like, hey, we have an in-house, like our broker is the attorney. So
Right.
if you get in trouble, like, or something happens to one of your transactions, not even in trouble, just in a situation, you can either call a bunch of real estate attorneys. There's like a couple of them and they'll all charge you this $400, $500. But if you're here with us, you
Yeah.
could make that phone call and it doesn't cost anything. And it's all keeping everything, again, vertically integrated in-house. I think that's a huge part of like the power of being together
Yeah.
with multiple different businesses is like we have so much to offer, especially for, investor based people. There's no other better place than at Lux. There's
And I think it's also the idea that we're not competing with each other, right? Like, we all do very similar things. I mean, you do property management. My husband does property management. We're all at the same brokerage, and we're not sweating about the competition. We're sort of like, like we're rocking it. There's enough
That's the one
business for
thing I
all of
love
us.
about real estate, though. It's like all the people that we hang out with. Like we're planning a trip to Cabo right now with a bunch of real estate guys that technically all compete with each other. Like Ryan,
Right.
Gumay, and I. We're like direct competition. We literally have quoted the same jobs, but we're in multiple group chats, like fucking around with each other, joking around. Like no one's out there trying to like steal this client from this person or do this from this. So there's so much in real estate that go around that like you really need the army.
Right. It just gets a little difficult because when I tag a recommendation, I have to figure out should I put the H in the Ryan today or no? Like, which one am I doing? Am I doing both?
Yeah. I think we're both fortunate. Like all of us are fortunate to be so busy that
Right.
none of that even really makes any difference in anybody's world. And a lot of the clients too that I'm after are in New York, California, all these places. So like our business is countrywide, even though it's based here in Maryland. Like our clients are all over the country. We can get anybody to invest in real estate anywhere in the world. We have
Right.
a lady from New Zealand coming into town. So it's like,
And now that you say that, I think a great example of that is I had that client who came in last week and they were doing a probate issue. They own a $5 million warehouse in Florida, and I am not licensed in Florida. And normally, if we weren't vertically integrated, I would probably have to find an agent and somehow beg for, a kickback, which is going to be more than my legal fee for whatever I'm doing them here. But I think I called you at the appointment. And before they walked out of here, we had an agent who works with us in Florida. We had, we'd been in contact with somebody in Florida. Like, before they walked out of here, we knew all of us were making money off this transaction. And the people who were here were hugging me and thanking me because they'd gone to so many people that didn't have the resources to connect all of these people together.
yeah, I think the phone call came in and within 10 minutes we're in a group chat with our agent in Florida getting comps and getting appraisals done on this like $5 million building. So it's the abundance mindset.
Yeah.
I'm good. My phone is like blowing up right now. These midday podcasts are tough.
I don't know why we're doing them.
I know. Well, it's because coming here at 5 o'clock is a nightmare. Traffic. But thanks everybody for listening. Diana, thank you for letting us come and set up the studio here at the
Thank you.
Lux DK, whatever other businesses you own.
All offices. It's
Yeah,
fine.
the all offices.
It's your office now, too.
Yeah. Well, it's too far. Well, I've actually put in a petition already, so we're all going to start signing.
I'm just telling you that our office space has multiple offices, so we could use the one near your house.
Well,
I'm not driving.
Two of your
there, but-
employees live above my actual office in the city, so we could say we should.
We could.
Laura, would you want to sign a petition stating that we move the office closer to home? Yes. Okay. So
Laura, you're
you
fired.
heard it here first, everybody.
You're
Thank
fired,
you.
Laura.
Thank you. All right. Till next time. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.